About started for you, Mary. It has started, Mary.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Fall 2015 Current Topics discussion from the Education and Behavioral Sciences section of ACRL. My name's Mary Feeney, and along with Jill Morningstar, we are your EBSS members at large. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with EBSS, but just to tell you a little bit about it, we're an active group that brings together education and behavioral sciences librarians. In addition to hosting online discussions like this one today, we also sponsor events at ALA annual conferences, including programs, a research poster forum, social events, and more. It's a really active and engaged group. The EBSS listserv and Facebook page are also a great way to find out about what we're doing and stay in touch. And I'm going to add the URL into the chat box so you can refer to that later. Please consider becoming a member of EBSS, and even better, joining one of our committees. So our current topics discussion today is about library services for graduate students. And I want to just give a shout out to EBS Secretary Erica Raber for sending us this idea when we sent out a call earlier in the semester. She was the one who gave us that idea. So taking off from the 2012 Association of Research Libraries report, Research Library Services for Graduate Students, our discussion today is going to center on the ongoing efforts at academic libraries to focus services and spaces particularly tuned to the needs of graduate students. Scott Collard will talk through some of the key findings of the ARL report, which he co-authored, as well as some strategies recommended by practitioners in this area. Scott is the head of specialized research services and social sciences and coordinator of graduate student services at New York University Division of Libraries. His research interests focus on the development of research services in academic libraries, and he is former chair of EBSS, so many of you know him. Our second speaker was going to be Jill Morningstar, who is the other EBSS member at large and a librarian for education and psychology at Michigan State University. Unfortunately, Jill's sick today and can't join us, so we are unfortunate to miss out on her presentation, but we'll send her some good thoughts. And after Scott's presentation, then we'll have much more time for discussion. We'll move right into that discussion with all of you to hear your ideas, challenges in serving graduate students, exciting things you're doing. Okay, so now I'm going to turn it over to Scott.
Great, thank you, Mary. Thanks a lot for asking me to be the presenter today. Can everybody hear me all right? Maybe one or two folks at least. Yes, great. Thank you. So just go ahead and I'll keep an eye on the chat box. As Mary mentioned, Jill was going to have a sort of a second half to this conversation. So hopefully that means we get to have a little bit more time for discussion. So I want to start us off sort of as a jumping off point, thinking about the report that we did. I guess as a caveat, you know, it's a few years old now, and, you know, I think that there's probably been a lot of evolution in this area, and I know when I talk to other folks, I think that that's true. So this is a nice time, I think, to hear what else is going on, and I would hope that people would have other ideas they want to raise, or might share some of what they're seeing at their own institutions. To give you an example of how that might look, I recently had a really interesting conversation here with some other librarians in New York about some of the similarities between I think what we would think of as basic freshman information literacy needs and new graduate student information literacy, and it was a very enlightening conversation. So I think we can be pretty wide-ranging. The report itself focused on some particular areas. So let me just kind of get started. Somebody tell me if the slides aren't advancing or anything, but let me give you a little bit of background first, and then I'll talk about some of the findings kinds of things that are in the report. And I'll just say this report is freely available online from the Association of Research Libraries website in PDF. It's part of the new roles for Librarians series that they did in the last few years, really thinking about different ways that librarians are organizing to work themselves, for their constituents, et cetera. So first of all, the kind of the why, I'm assuming if you're here in this conversation, a lot of this won't be particularly surprising, but just the number one huge reason for a lot of us to be thinking maybe differently about graduate students is just a massive growth in graduate education, especially, thank you, Mary, especially at the master's level. I'm not going to throw many statistics at you during this thing, but to give you a sense of the scale between, this is the NCS data on post-baccalaureate enrollment, between 1983 and 2010, graduate enrollment in universities increased from 1.6 to 2.9 million students, and it's projected to increase through 2021 to 3.5 million students. So that's a lot more students. It's a lot more pressure and demand for our services. I think, you know, the driver for us personally around here is just a real increase in terminal master's programs where you have folks who are not necessarily working on what we might have considered a traditional, almost sort of doctorally oriented track, and they're not just in professional schools. Our arts and sciences folks, pretty much every department has some kind of terminal master's now, so that's a big change, I think, creating a lot of demand on us, as I mentioned. I think another driver for people to think about this, and I'd love to hear if this has been true for any of you, is thinking about assessment tools like LibQual Plus. When you get back those LibQual results and you see what graduate students are saying about your collections, your services, your facilities, your spaces, et cetera, you know, if that's a driver for kinds of things. And another thing I think is just that we in libraries are, you know, starting to expand into other kinds of services, and whether that's in partnership with somebody else, like a writing center or an IT kind of unit, or whether it's just growing services that we are seeing a demand for that's not getting met anywhere else on campus. I think that that's another thing, and that's the more that those appeal to those graduate populations, I think the more we're going to see them coming in. So there's a lot of really obvious whys. There's a bunch more than this, I'm sure, that we could all think of, but that was the kind of impetus for us trying to think through this report. So, like I said, the new roles for New Times is part of this ARL series, or is that ARL series that this report was part of. It's really had a couple of ways that we went about doing this. So a scan of research libraries websites was one thing that was, you know, a really fast and easy way to see how people were kind of changing their approach to graduate students. We did do a fairly large set of targeted interviews, both in person and on the phone, on Skype kinds of things, with a number of both library directors, but also folks who are really on the ground providing all sorts of services to their graduate students. I won't give you the whole list, but Cornell, University of Washington, UIUC, ourselves, of course, Indiana, a couple of Canadian institutions as well. So really tried to talk to some people that seemed like there was some interesting stuff going on, who might have something to say about this. Part of what we did is just try to synthesize these trends and themes. That's what we'll talk about for the rest of the slideshow. And as the interviews went on, you know, we sort of started focusing in these kind of 4 main areas of interest, which sort of turns into 5 themes you'll see in the report. And they're really about, you know, how do you conceptualize what a graduate student is? How do you think about your spaces? How do you think about partnerships in this new world? And how do you think about your organization? So those are kind of the areas. We okay so far? Anybody have any questions or want to pause anywhere there? Assuming we can all still hear. Okay, that's great. So let me hit on. So the 5 themes that the report kind of lays out are these ones that are listed here. So thinking about a suite of graduate student focused services, something that a lot of folks are really trying to do. That is not just one-offs here and there, but really trying to understand how those services fit together and can be developed programmatically, delivered with some kind of cohesiveness, et cetera. Another big tall order for a lot of us is thinking about space use by graduate students. We can talk a little bit about that in a second. Strategic alliances and collaborations. This is a huge one. Again, maybe not surprisingly, but folks trying to think about how to have the right partners on campus, the right folks in the room to carry their services forward. Structures to support graduate students really was this thing about organizational structures, and maybe we need to think about our roles really specifically differently in light of the growth of our graduate programs. And the last kind of theme that was sort of shot through in a lot of ways, it's just this idea of trying to be agile, innovating, experimenting, trying lots of different things. So those were sort of the outcomes of a lot of these interviews, and when we summed everything up, those are kind of the themes. I'm going to walk through those themes individually, just to try to give you a flavor. The first one is this idea of the, at least somewhat cohesive suite of services. So part of this is related to, I think, maybe research libraries, for example, might be oriented around subject librarians. Well, a lot of our new master's programs in my institution, and I'm assuming this is true in a lot of others, tend to have a very sort of interdisciplinary cast. And there might not be an easy match for a subject librarian. So making sure to connect those kinds of people becomes important. Another that we heard a lot from people is that master's programs might be administered, in fact, somewhat separately from the rest of the department. They're almost standalone units a lot of the time, and I'll just say sort of information or communication flow between the home unit and the master's program sounds like it can be a little rough sometimes, and maybe you're not actually getting into those populations very well because they're not really integrated with the rest of the department. The other big rationale, I think, for trying to approach things from a suite of services kind of perspective is just a lot of problems with the expectations of the skill levels of students. In particular, I think this maybe matches with the master's students in particular, an expectation of their skill levels coming in, an expectation of what their career path is going to look like, that are really often set more around doctoral level students or, sort of a more traditional graduate student track like that. So with that of a background, some of the things we heard about are, maybe not surprisingly again, a real need for some broad instructional services. When you're talking about students who are, coming back to school after a long break, who are working another job and getting a master's on the side, who have family obligations, who tend to be more international student population than our regular populations, you start to think about how do you provide some broad instructional interventions that are going to help those folks kind of get up to speed fast and be efficient and pick up some of the skills that I think some of the faculty might think they already have or should have. Big shout out here from all the institutions that we interviewed about things that we almost consider basic skills for graduate students, like bibliographic management, even things like some institutions are working with their graduate students on things like presentation preparation, thinking about note-taking, access to help for writing, all sorts of things like that, in addition to basic research skills, using library resources, those kinds of things. Another rationale, or another kind of theme that emerges here in this suite of services, and this goes a little bit to what I've already said, but is this idea that you need to segment your approaches in some kinds of ways, and it's not simply on a traditional line of maybe master's students versus doctoral students, and that their skill sets are slightly different, but really, just the heterogeneity of our graduate students is such that we really have to think when you're developing services about who everyone is and how they're going to access those services and when they're going to be available to do things. So people talking a lot about, there can be very demographically diverse. Like I said, they could have other jobs, they could have families, they could be in the midst of a career change, it could be international. But I mean, another kind of more overlooked thing is that, in fact, from day to day or from semester to semester, graduate students go through sort of an evolution as they go. So we kind of talk about this as being part of the life cycle, and depending upon who you are or what area you're in, you could go from being somebody who's primarily involved in classwork to being somebody who's reading intensively to prepare for some sort of examination, somebody who's actually thrown into the classroom and is teaching, obviously writing, people who are towards the end of a larger writing kind of thing, like a dissertation in that sort of 11th hour, who suddenly need different kind of help about thinking about themselves as an author who's going to publish or something like that. So we're really worried about copyright and authors' rights. So all these things can play out in one given student over the range of their life. The last kind of thing in this suite, I think, is really thinking about how do you coordinate and centralize those outreach efforts with all sorts of different ways to get the words in front, to get the message out in front of your graduate students, especially given the fact that sometimes they're not always integrated perfectly into the departments. All those things I kind of talked about earlier. So a lot of folks working obviously with sort of student support, like Student Resource Center kinds of folks, as well as with schools and academic units. A lot of work about helping coordinate others in your own library, your subject librarians or whatever, to kind of have a consistent message and get that out to talk about, what are those instructional offerings, what are the services that they can get as a graduate student, all those sorts of things. And a last piece of this is just thinking about labeling and branding and how you talk about what it means to be a graduate student at my institution and how that ties to the kind of things you're trying to accomplish. So that was in that sort of suite of services theme. And like I said, if you have questions, please ask as we go along. The next area is really about spaces. So again, the rationale here is not any mystery. Academic departments have limited space, and what limited space they have very often is going to be intended for doctoral students. Those master students may not have spaces, but also a higher level and expectation and need for technologically enhanced spaces. Depending on the program, maybe a higher level need for things like graduate student work. There are, I know, 2 or 3 programs here at NYU, just as an example, where even as a graduate student, you do most of your work in groups. And that's something that's different from the traditional vision of that philosophy student writing by themselves in a little carrel. This growing interdisciplinarity, I think, also changes the way you think about space, where you want to allow for people to be in contact with each other that you wouldn't necessarily. And another kind of rationale with spaces is that a lot of folks are really getting feedback about the sort of loneliness or isolation that graduate student life can sometimes create in people, and so looking for a way to help ameliorate that with spaces that are focused on graduate students, that provide an opportunity for community or for like-minded or like-typed graduate students to come together in a similar location, maybe create an environment that sort of has that incubator kind of feel to it. So those kinds of things. So there's a lot of rationales with spaces. The main things that we heard about in this area that folks are working on is really collocation of resources and services and technology into one place. So instead of lots of things scattered all over the library or all over campus in departmental libraries, really starting to centralize some of that stuff. And again, I'm sure most folks know this, the kind of metaphoric but actual sort of movement in this area is something that a lot of folks are calling a research commons kind of thing. something where grad needs are front and center, that research support services and materials and technology are front and center. And so really kind of providing a home for that community, a second home for graduate students outside of their department, really supporting them as a group. Last thing I would say in this is a real focus on productive work. So we heard a lot about graduate students, who work at being a graduate student as if it's their job, and so you don't maybe design your spaces in exactly the way. So, maybe fewer couches and more really good, solid chairs that you can sit on for a long time without getting uncomfortable and keep working. So really supporting how you can support that sort of long duration work, I think was another thing. Moving on to partnerships, a rationale here is kind of a no-brainer. Libraries really can't do all the things that our graduate students need, and we really need to have good partners to help us deliver on some of this stuff. I mentioned this a little bit with outreach, but lots of folks were talking about, strengthening connections with things like Student Resource Center, with the Office of International Student Populations, or writing centers, or all those units that act as other support. Not only can you cross-pollinate in terms of your outreach and marketing, but you can even start thinking about programming that you can contribute to on each of those sides. Obviously, in the academic units, working with student affairs, deans, folks like that, helping get a good two-way flow of communication was really important to everybody. Also thinking about things like graduate student government, graduate student organizations and councils, and things like that. So slightly more on the academic side. Cross-unit collaborations. We heard a lot of interesting things about programs that are bringing together people from a lot of these different areas and sort of approaching the beginnings of a graduate student's life as almost a boot camp, where you get a little bit from a lot of different folks all at once in a programmatic way to help ease your transition into being a graduate student. Thought that was really interesting. I said, and many more, because there were lots and lots of these. Obviously, I think a lot of us who work with folks who are doing scholarly communications work, graduate students are a really key audience for some of that. Lots of co-hosting of conferences, talks, sort of semi-facilitating kinds of things. Embedding librarians within programs or things like the boot camp, I think, targeted support for TAs that might be coordinated through a school, et cetera. And then the last thing that's quite interesting is, some folks having the grads themselves as part of their partnership model, both as maybe members of some of the work that you're doing, but as also through things like grad advisory groups that help you steer the way your services or spaces are going to develop. So that's an interesting development as well. Turning to structures, we're almost there. So sorry if it's droning on here a little bit. I think here's where we were talking a little bit about all the different ways that the institutions we were talking to are thinking about reorienting or orienting or sort of re-engineering themselves to make this a priority a little bit. I think rationale here, again, we talked about LiveQual Plus, but there's lots of other data that we might look at that could tell us that we could do a better job reaching graduate students or helping them. I think building capacity or finding out that a program has sort of been left out of the equation or fallen through the cracks. I think the very real understanding that in a subject librarian's daily life, it's hard to expect that they're going to communicate everything they do to a dean of student affairs in a school, right? They're really more focused maybe on their department or whatever it is, so really kind of centralizing communication. So there's a lot of ways that that this seems like it could be a good idea. some of the examples we heard of is places that have just said, okay, we're going to have a graduate student services librarian. So that position is about sort of steering and about communication, but it's also about not only developing services for your graduate students, but developing, I think, your colleagues within your institution to kind of think about how their own services are working for their graduate students and maybe, again, get that kind of cohesive message together. I think good old librarianness, one way to deal with this is to committeize it. So we could see a number of folks that have gone this route where there's some sort of working group or something like that that is kind of continually developing or delivering these kinds of services. I think subject librarian 2.0, you know, we were really talking about this a lot in the last couple years, and you know, some of that work is coming from the new roles for new times. You know, how do you build or expand on subject or domain specific expertise to enhance communication, to enhance skill with data or digital humanities or whatever it is? And I think that, you know, there are some institutions out there that are trying to think about, you know, having a subject librarian take on the role of being a little bit more focused on graduate students. And then there are some folks that have, in fact, kind of reorganized. I think one of the things that we noticed was folks that have said, okay, let's reorganize around, instead of departments or what have you, around, you know, strategic needs. And, you know, if their institution had said, you know, there's a strategic need to support research at the graduate level, that instead of some other kind of structure, you say, okay, we're going to have a team that's going to do that, and that's going to be their job. So there's some interesting work underway to kind of rethink organizations that way also. The last slide, and it's kind of slow, and or kind of short, and it's not rocket science, I don't think, is that doing all of this requires a good amount of agility, and that's a real moving target. And I think this is actually a good jumping off place for discussion here. You know, most of the interviewees really stress the need to be okay with prototypes, to be okay with pilots, and that, you know, it's going to take some time for staff to develop and for the kind of organization to catch up sometimes. So I think, you know, prototyping is really important. I think assessment was a really key finding here. Really trying a lot of different ways to understand what's going on with your graduate students, being very multimodal, and that can be everything from, you know, the obvious surveys and focus groups and whatnot, all the way out to, you know, folks that are really using the ethnographic, observational kinds of methods to understand what's going on with graduate students, a lot of interviewing, those kinds of things, targeted outreach. So obviously all of this also brings up resource allocation, and you know, we had an interviewee that stated, I'll read you a quote, "Nothing involves new positions, but just different priorities and doing work differently." So mining talent from within, developing new skills, that kind of thing. So that's definitely a theme. And new skills development often means, in this case, I think, you know, getting better at all those things, all the above things: change management, prototyping, better collaborative skills, all those kinds of things. So I think that's maybe a good jumping off point, and we can go sort of anywhere with the questions. As far as I'm concerned, the main thing, and this is the other big takeaway from our report, is that, you know, there is a certain sense in that there's a lot of us out there doing this. It's not always super easy to figure out what folks are doing, and that a real key is that we need to start learning from each other and exchanging a little better. I'm going to go over to Jill's presentation, because though we don't get to hear her presentation, which is unfortunate, we do have a list of questions there. These are really some starter questions, but Mary, maybe you could comment on, should folks do the chat or should they go for mic, or any combo? Do you care?
No, I don't care. Sometimes chat's a little easier only because we don't, if people are trying to talk at the same time, but I think there's a small enough group that if people want to just chime in if they have a microphone, we definitely want to hear, because one of the things that Jill was going to talk about was kind of going from Scott's broad, the overview to what is she doing at her institution. And so we definitely want to hear examples of what are other people doing. So I do hope people will chime in either the chat box or on the mic. What do you all think? What questions do you have, first of all? Do you have any questions for Scott about the report? So maybe we could, oh, good. All participants are mic'd. Okay, so you do have to use the chat box.
Okay.
So maybe one other question that we don't have on there is, are there challenges that you're having in working with graduate students that we could talk about?
Yeah, I threw out a possibly, inflammatory comment at the beginning, about this interesting conversation I'd have with somebody about how similar kind of information literacy needs can be between an incoming freshman and incoming master's student. And, I wonder if, if it's easier, people could talk about it in particular areas in instruction or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Right, so some things are rolling in here.
Yeah, so Kate is asking, how do you best work with online grad students? And I'm sure others who are attending could answer that maybe better than I necessarily can. But, I think one of the things we're doing at the University of Arizona is we, we're trying to be digital so that you can be everywhere, right? So even if people are here and they're not online grad students, they still prefer not to come to campus sometimes. So, trying to have online tutorials, having more digital resources. But I definitely would like to hear what other people are saying. And then Erica, let me read your comment. So Erica's talking about the life cycle of grad students, so what kind of services connect with each piece of the life cycle?
Yeah,
that's interesting.
Yeah, I can probably talk about some life cycle stuff, Erica. Hi, Erica. I think, I gave a couple of examples. So we have, so I think maybe at the, I'll boil these down maybe, but I think at the beginning of most grad students' entree, there's a lot of sort of catching up feeling. There's a lot of kind of getting to know your most important resources in your subject area. So these are kinds of things that are really happening at the beginning. I think we've seen those needs slightly change, for example, when graduate students get to the point where they're starting to do a proposal or to think about their capstone, right? So their literature needs to be deeper, but it might not also need to be a little bit broader. They may need to start looking for interdisciplinary connections. And so we might actually have a slightly different instructional intervention for those folks. Another place, again, kind of further along is, working with our School of Arts and Sciences. They have a seminar, I'm not exactly sure what it's called. It's sort of a symposium for folks who are going to be becoming teachers for the first time. So it's really about pedagogy, and it's about a few other kinds of things. And the library contributes, part of a session to that kind of thing to talk about resources that you can use that the library has that we can help support you in being a teacher. Later still interventions, I think, we have specific kinds of spaces and programs that relate only specifically to folks who are in a writing stage, and what they really need is space and accountability. So we have some things built in there. And then the one I already mentioned is like all the way at the end, we see folks that have things that are sort of like, you're about to be done, you're about to be an author, you're about to submit your dissertation to ProQuest. You need a whole kind of separate talk with us about that stuff. So there are, I think, a few places, and we're always trying to look for other places where, we might have something to help them or to contribute. A great kind of question we ask ourselves all the time is, like, we have a career center on campus. Other than each knowing about each other, like, is there some other way that we could be helping at that point in somebody's life cycle? So I think that's an interesting question.
Yeah, I like the thinking about it in those terms, Erica. I think that's helpful. I want to make sure we don't miss anything here. Oh, and then Jennifer was responding to what you said, Scott, about the information literacy needs and skills of graduate students. And I guess, Jennifer's comment there too, yeah, not wanting to recap, but also maybe we can't assume just because they're graduate students that they know what we would think they would know.
Yeah, that seems to be the read that we got from most people. And that goes a little bit also to the expectations of the faculty that they're going to be working with, who really have assumptions of a high level of skill in a lot of kinds of ways. I think also moving much more clearly into needing help within a discipline is something that might be different. But honestly, for us around here, the main thing that we seem to encounter is just kind of people are really worried. There's a lot of anxiety about starting a graduate program, and kind of regardless of their actual level of preparation, there is a shift in them about sort of their motivation, their intrinsic motivation towards the program that seems to make them want to engage more. So that's another kind of thing that I think is somewhat common. I don't know if there are other people that have some comments on that.
Yeah, in fact, I was going to say, Jennifer, if you've, what experience you've had with that, and I think there's also a difference between the master's and the PhD students too. But yeah, what have others' experience been as far as what they need to learn and how prepared they are?
Yeah, I would agree with that, Erica.
Yeah, it does.
It's funny because I think, we were prepared. It sounds very, very much like we're all, I think we're prepared to think about things like the space in our library as needing this sort of portfolio. Yeah, there's groups, and there's people who want quiet, and there's people who want noisy, and there's people who want a cup of coffee. And honestly, I feel like everything has to be a portfolio now, because there's no monolithic need that you can really orient yourself around. And so that means you have to really think about all that segmentation, I think, or some other organizing principle that's gonna work, that's gonna let you meet that variety.
I want to back up to the first question from Kate again about how do you work best with online graduate students, and see if anyone wanted to comment on that. I'm sure there's some people who are attending who have worked with online students a lot, but maybe you have some ideas there.
I'd love to.
Let y'all think on that one. While you're thinking on that one, and also to just point out the comment from my colleague Elizabeth here at U of A, that another approach that's worked for us is partnering, as you talked about before, Scott, that partnering with other units on campus, because if we are going to have to do this, everything has to be portfolio, well, then we can't do all that ourselves, and so partnering with other people.
Yeah, I think that's key. Elizabeth, do you want to say something, or obviously Mary, I guess you can also, about GPSC? You want to acronym that for us?
It's our Graduate and Professional Student Council. So it's like the student government group for graduate students. We also have an undergraduate student group. And so we actually have, some of us in the library who partner with them, but also we have like our library administrators who meet with them regularly to talk to them about how we're using the student fee that we have.
Yeah, that's great. That's really interesting. Have they been a receptive group for you?
Well, I've never personally met with them, but I have heard from our administrators that yes, they are, and they really like to hear the details about what we're doing. So I think they appreciate that the transparency and, you know, here's where your money's going. It's not just going to the rec center and you don't know where that really goes. So yeah, I think it's been a good way to reach them at that level. So let's see,
That's
there's
great,
lots of stuff I'm missing in the chat box. Let me see. Yeah, that comment from Jennifer about how do you translate library space online? That's really interesting.
Really interesting. Yeah, we talk a little bit here about like the secret sauce of the library, like what, you know, we can't keep people away even if we wanted to, and it is interesting, you know, how do you create that kind of
Scott, I think you're cutting in and out. I don't know if it's just my headset, but I missed what you said there.
Yeah, I don't have a good answer for it either. I'm sorry to say. I think it is a difficult one because, yeah, that the community aspect that you get out of the physical space is hard to recreate in that environment.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Elizabeth also commented here that we had experimented with offering an online credit course for grad students, and that was taught online for a few years, but now it's gonna be free and it's in different modules online. And then Kaya has some suggestions there as well. I'm hoping people are reading these comments. And again, it's lots of different ways of reaching people.
Yeah, these are great comments.
Elizabeth, if you could answer Jennifer's question, what are some of the topics covered by your credit courses for grad students? I was not involved in that, so I can't answer that. Oh, but I can comment on Margaret's question about with online programs, does the library ever have a presence in the CMS, course management system? One of the things we've done here is that we have, it took a few years, I think, to get this implemented, but we were able to add a library tab, we call it the library tools tab, within every course that's in our course management system. And there's a basic template based on sort of the broad subject area of things that we put in there to push out, and then we can also customize it as well. So every single class that's using the course management system has a library tools tab in it. Whether they're online programs or not, they're almost all using the course management system for something. I'd be curious to hear how people are, I mean, some of the ideas about going to orientation and stuff like that, but how some of you are promoting or advertising, if you do have a suite of services, or like as Scott said, this portfolio of different things, how are you presenting that to graduate students? Like, do you have something on your website? Do you, you know, how are they made aware of this sort of range of things that we can do for them? Oh, good. Okay, Eric commented that their subject guides are integrated into their LMS too. Okay, comment from Aaron. People's cost-benefit analysis of the different methods they use to reach their graduate students. That's I would love to hear what people say about that.
Yeah, that's a fascinating one.
Well, it relates to what you said at the beginning about assessment. How are we assessing what we're doing, right? Okay, good. Grad workshops publicized on your website. Good. From Corinne. Does anyone want to comment on Erin's question there about cost-benefit analysis of different ways? Oh, good, Erica. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think, you know, we have, in some ways, you know, we're trying to track what communication channels seem most useful.
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you can, I mean, part of, and you know, this has just been our approach here is, you know, part of what we try to do with our subject specialists is, you know, really feed them messages that they can pass on, because all of our data has shown that subject specialists tend to be a pretty powerful conduit for information into their departments, because they have a pre-existing relationship and maybe have you know, developed some credibility there. But I think we haven't gotten as granular as we could. You know, between the paper signs we tape up on the walls and the things that we put on the LCD screens and all of that, you know, we can't really tease that stuff out. So I do think that that's an interesting idea for, you know, how to get a little bit better intelligence about what's working.
Mm-hmm. So Erica, you've done some assessment. How did you, I'm curious how you assessed the individual consultations. Did you just send like a follow-up survey kind of thing, or how did you get feedback from them? And then there's Elizabeth's response. Someone had asked earlier about the grad course. So there's the response there about the different modules. But yeah, I'd be interested to know about assessing. And I may be misremembering, but I think one of the things in that EBSS has talked about related to the ACRL Plan of Excellence, one of the things we need to, you know, address is the value of academic libraries. And so definitely there's that component of, well, how are we going to assess these things? I mean, maybe that's something that EBSS we can follow up on as well.
Yeah, it's really a great idea.
Okay, thanks, Erica. So sending an anonymous survey, great. That's a great idea. Let's see. Oh, okay, interesting response. Okay, everything that measures as high impact in assessment are the time-intensive person-to-person things that are hard to scale. That's true. Very good point. Right, and then how do you scale that?
Right.
It sounds like we're all grappling with a lot of the same things.
This is a really interesting line of discussion here. I think yeah, certainly we don't have the answers here. Hoping you guys will all come up with it. I mean, this does also kind of get onto a couple of things I did want to sort of prompt if we hadn't had time to get to them, but it is just about, you know, presumably most of us in attendance right now have some relationship to working with our graduate students, and perhaps maybe that relationship has grown in the past. And I wonder if you know, folks have any thoughts about this idea of, you know, where does the community of practice around working with graduate students fit in terms of our professional development, or I don't feel like I see a huge amount of opportunities to engage in these conversations, so it's really nice that we are today. But anybody have any thoughts on that, or has anybody found anything really useful that they want to share?
Specifically around communities of practice, Scott, you're saying?
Yeah, I think so, or how we could all help learn from each other a little bit better in these areas, since we are all having some of the same questions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think those would be good follow-ups within EBSS, you know, like either within our own committees or, you know, if we're talking about programs that we want to do, what are some of the things that, you know, following up on these kind of things like communities of practice or assessment or some of these other issues that we all seem to be dealing with. An interest group, maybe, that kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, Erica, thanks for sending the survey link.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Erica. That's great.
Well, and just to let everyone know, I mean, we are recording this, so when we send it out, the chat transcript should be attached with that as well, so you all can follow up with that too. Oh, interesting. Okay, that your university that focuses on undergrads, working on getting more resources. So that's even more challenge. It's challenging enough, but then when the focus is not on grad students, it's even more challenging.
Yeah.
Great. Wow, interesting. Well, this is really great. I'm glad so many of you were willing to share your ideas and participate. And I definitely think, you know, maybe it's something that EBSS can follow up with some of these ideas and some of the issues. And thank you, Scott, for your great presentation. I really appreciate you being willing to talk to us. And thanks again to everyone who participated. We can continue on for a little longer, or, you know, I'll see if there's any more questions or comments here. Otherwise, we can start wrapping it up. Any other last comments or questions? Mm-hmm. I also want to thank Alois at ACRL for her support with webinar, helping me figure out how to record it, and getting us all set up with our slides and everything. And even though Jill couldn't join us, I wanted to thank her for being willing to present and having her presentation ready. We're sorry we had to miss her. I also wanted to mention that.
Thank you, Mary.
Oh, sure, no problem. If anyone has suggestions for future current topic discussions, we do another one in the spring. So maybe there's some things here we can follow up on at the spring session. I'm not exactly sure when we'll do it, but it's sometime in the spring. Or if you have ideas for other topics, you can send those on to me and Jill. I'm going to put our contact information in the chat box there for you. You know, please feel free to follow up with us. And you can also send ideas up through your committee chairs or directly to us.
And if anybody has other questions for me that they want to take offline, I'm just scott.collard@nyu.edu, and I'd be happy to chat with folks more if that would be helpful.
Erica, sorry, I was busy talking, so I missed your comment earlier about build your own workshops. So can you talk a little bit more about that? That sounds really neat.
Yeah, that's so cool.
And was that specifically for graduate students? I can't tell if anyone's typing. Oh, there it is. Great. And then multiple people could meet with you at the same time. I see. Okay, great. Well, thanks again, everyone, and I hope the rest of your semester is really good, and happy holidays. I'm sure some of us will be reconvening online for midwinter meetings, And Jill and I will make sure we get this recording sent out to all of you when it's ready. Thanks again, everyone. Thanks, Scott.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.